The Minirig 2.1 versus 2.1. Mini in stereo, the Mark 3 in
Don't
stereo.
be so ridiculous.
Okay.
Minirig 2.1. That's 2 speakers and 1 subwoofer. And Minirig, you've got 2 ways of doing it. You can do it with the full size, which ain't, you know, huge anyway, Minirig Mark 3, or you can do it with the teeny weeny little Minirig Mini 2s. People will know. So what is the difference when you hook them up with the sub? And so having, you know, decent bass on the speaker itself is not quite an issue because the subwoofer has taken over a lot of that role. What's it like? Because if you can get decent bass out the subwoofer, you could still have this little speaker you could take alone or with its mate for nice stereo in your hotel room, wherever you want, wherever you can only have really small speakers and have a decent sound, and get home and hook it up to your subwoofer. Does it still sound pretty decent? Do I really need the bigger Mark III, or, you know, the Mark III having more bass anyway, inherently? Is it going to still sound a fuller sound? Is it still going to be, you know, that much better, even in 2.1 versus 2.1? I'm going to answer those questions. I'm also going to say, for many reasons, I am doing these recordings on axis. What do you mean by on axis? Well, I'm glad you asked me. It means that I'm doing it face up. Now, by the default tuning for the Mini rigs, whether it's the Mini or the Mark III, is listening like that. So it's a little bit boosted at the high end, because assuming you're going to be listening off axis about 45 degrees, a lot of that treble is going to be lost. And so what you end up with is quite a flat frequency response. If you listen on axis, it sounds a bit high pitched in the high end. You may not like it, but then again, you may do, because as we get older, you know, we do lose a lot of that high end sensitivity. And we tend to boost the treble, and it still sounds flat to us like it does to an 18-year-old who isn't boosting the treble. The end shot of that I'm saying is I'm doing it on axis because when you hook it up to the sub, even if it's a bit boosted, all you're getting is a bit more of a smiley face signature, a la JBL, which a lot of people like anyway. And quite honestly, I do like the clarity, which now doesn't sound out of place when you have it in a 2.1 or 2.2 system. Other than, I will say, when I get towards the high end, it gets a bit screechy at the high end as even the subwoofer drops some of that bass. But other than that, I'm getting a clearer picture of speaker versus speaker when I'm doing it at on axis rather than 45 degrees. Just to quickly go over the differences again. The Minirig subwoofer, this is the Mark III version, which is definitely better than the Mark II. If you're looking at like cheap second-hand prices, I still think the Mark III is the one to go for. It's a smoother response. The Mark II has an upper bass boost, which suited it when it was paired with the full-size Minirig Mark II. Now, 40 watts and up to 7 hours playing on maximum, the battery life, up to 7 hours, a 40-watt speaker versus a little teeny weeny Minirig Mini, 3 hours. They say maximum, when you've got it on maximum volume, it's a 15-watt speaker. So a pair of them 30 watts, a pair of those 80 watts, plus a 40-watt speaker. It needs to be pointed out though, obviously it's not a straight equation because it requires more power to drive the bass. Not because low bass, not because the frequency of the low bass requires more power, but the mechanics of creating that low bass requires more power. So it's not like a straight equivalent, say one Minirig 40 watts, one subwoofer 40 watts, and you've got 80 watts of power. It's just that it's easier to drive the high end, and if you stuck all 40 watts at the high end, it would sound considerably louder. I don't know why I'm telling you that. I just thought it was interesting at the time. Going straight on. Testing it at 2.1 versus 2.1, around 33%. I'm saying that because I'm also playing 43% on the Minirigs, because when I play 43%, in terms of what you hear, the volumes are about matched, 33% versus 43%. So I'm going to give you the difference at 33 and 43.
So both playing at 33%, the Mini Mark II high gain, Minirig Mark III high gain, but the bass slightly more bass heavy. There's less going on the mids and highs with the Mark II, minus 18.5, minus 19.5. But to the ear, quieter. Switch to a matched volume, 43%. Pretty well matched mids and highs. It's now very bass heavy in high gain, 15.9, 19.5, 3.5 decibels more bass heavy, and it is over bass heavy with Mark II. So the obvious thing is, well, then switch to low gain, what happens?
So right away, that 43% test tells me that the subwoofer is not adjusting according to whether it's on a Mark III or the Mini 2. It's doing its own thing in terms of volume. It's telling me there's not a lot in it. When you volume match the Minirig, which these Minis obviously are about low level listening. You could just listen that close up as well, by the way. So it's not just about low level, it's close up listening. It does sound pretty decent, and even 2.1 versus 2.1, you don't really get that sense of lack of bass that you would do normally with the Mini. Sounds pretty decent, other than there's clearly a difference in the sound signatures. It's not cleaner and real with the Mark IIIs. It's more fun, fizzy, more echoey. It almost has a pseudo surround nature. When I'm playing in stereo, it's quite nice. And that I find more relaxing versus that's a bit more in your face. Now, as I said, 43%, suddenly it's like for like. So forget about 33%. Let's have another listen at 43%. But as I also said, when you have low gain on the sub, because the sub doesn't seem to change according to which speaker it's on, it seems low gain. I don't know, maybe low gain has always been a design element to go with the Mini, but I didn't see anything online to actually state that. However, in my little testing, I do think low gain goes with the Mini, high gain goes with the Mark III. That's not to say you can't have both on low gain. I'm just saying, keeping it simple, in terms of matching 2.1 versus 2.1, clearly low gain on the sub for the Mini, high gain and high gain for the Mark IIIs. Have a listen.
Easy. I never thought you'd be the one. I never meant to take your heart. I never felt so hard. I never meant to be the one. I never thought I'd break your heart. You and me, we both live life at full speed. Easy to see when we collide. No one walks away easy. I never thought you'd be the one. I never meant to take your heart. I never felt so hard. I never meant to be the one. I never thought I'd break your heart. And after the stars have crumbled to dust, we still feel the fires burning in us, burning in us. And it hurts so bad, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. No, 'cause after the storm, you'll see the sun. And after the storm.
So now, pretty well matched. 43% Mark II, low gain, matches. Mark III in high gain mode, 33% volume. And it is quite a good match. Now the bass, 1 decibel higher on the 33% Mark III, but still to the ear, quite well matched. The Mini Mark II sounding a bit more echoey, a bit more shimmer going on, whereas the Mark III, much cleaner, but maybe a bit more sterile sounding.
So these lower volumes, 33%, is you can listen It's not going to wake up the neighbours. So that's a reasonable volume. That's a reasonable volume to expect out of the Mini. So 43% low gain on the sub. It's a match between the two, and it's really about the different sound signatures. So you could have your little Minis and still get the sub at another point and have a really nice setup that's going to match much bigger speakers. But you've got the options of what you can do in terms of why you'd have such a small speaker, and I assume it's about portability, and you can slip that almost, well, certainly into a jacket pocket, where you couldn't quite do that with the larger Mark III. So as I said, cleaner, more real, more in your face, more fizzy, more echoey, more kind of pseudo surround, but quite nice, more pleasant, more relaxing. That's a bit more of an edgy sound, and depending on what kind of music you're listening to, one or the other will suit your style of listening. And again, we are talking about still getting if you want, at the time of your choosing, still having a really small speaker and getting a really big sound out of it when you go to 2.1. Do have to point out, £140, £140, £100. We're not talking particularly cheap. It's the options you get and the ecosystem you get with Minirig to do lots of different things. You're not talking about one speaker and doing one thing. So more real world listening in terms of filling out a decent sized room, around 70%. What that actually means is when I try to match the sounds, and of course I'm matching the mids and the highs, about 73% on the Mini, 63% on the Mark III. And as I said, with all these recordings, not doing anything in post, the difference in volume, if you're hearing any difference in volume, is simply because that's a real world difference. But it sounds pretty balanced to me.
Going on, I'll be there in a heartbeat. Tell me your favorite song, I'll put it on repeat. I could wait for you forever, through the storms or any weather. Yeah, you like New York in the sunshine. I'm a fool, yeah, I got love blind. And ooh, yeah, got my heart out, and it's covered in gold. Like moonlight over Hollywood, and it's cool, yeah, because you know it's good, oh baby. Motion got me all faded, my heart got me going all crazy, and I won't be walking away, yeah. I'm a fool, yeah, I got love blind, and ooh, yeah, got my heart out, and it's covered in gold, like moonlight over Hollywood, and it's cool, yeah, 'cause you know it's good, oh baby.
So matching the mids and the highs, 73% Mark II, 63% the Mark III. High gain on the Mini Mark II. It's overly bass heavy, some 5 decibels heavier in the bass than the Mark III. Switch to low gain, you're now slightly bass light in comparison to the Mark III when you are matching the mids and the highs. But still, low gain on the Mark II does seem the best match and is not far off the Mark III. You can, of course, in the app, dial down the sub volume and get a closer match with the Mark III.
So these volumes, obviously you're getting near the limit with the Mini, 15 watts, 40 watts. So these volumes, you're now kind of in between. If you leave high gain on the sub, it sounds bass heavy, it clearly sounds boosted, but I will say it's still a nice listen. That's a fun listen. I can hear, well, that's a bit more in the bass than you know, a flat frequency response would have, but it sounds fun. If you go to low gain with the sub, still high gain on the Minis, then you're edging towards bass light, and the Mark III with the Mini at these volumes, you know, is in between the two. As I said, you can of course just adjust the volume of the subwoofer in the app. I'm just giving you my overview simplified, but you can take it further by adjusting in the app the actual volume you're getting at your subwoofer. There's more of a difference now when you get to the louder volumes between the Mark III still sounding a bit full and you're starting to hear a bit of a thinness in the Mini. But it's still a decent listen, you know, around 70%. You can fill out a room. You've only got this tiny speaker, but you've hooked it up to the subwoofer. You can still get a nice sound that's going to rival, you know, a lot of normal speakers in terms of room filling sound. Now, only one thing left. You've guessed it, it's the maximum volume test, pushed to the limit. What is the real world difference? It's not going to be a shocker, is it, that 15 watts cannot keep up with your 40 watts. It's not really a spoiler, I hope. And this is what it sounds like.
They want you when you leave, so I kinda watch it bleed. I guess we're more appealing as illusions on the screen, and that's what hurts the most. Being loved for what's unknown. Open up, you're guaranteed to get your heart broke. We wanna feel so special, and that's why you love me. I made you feel like sin.
So very much as you would expect, when it comes to the maximum volumes, the Mini Mark II cannot hold a candle to the Minirig Mark III. In absolute terms, 6 decibels down on average across the whole frequency range, about 7 decibels down in terms of absolute peak, 106, 113. But of course, they both have the same subwoofer. In terms of bass, about the same, 25.3, 26.1 at that 56, 57 hertz. The difference, of course, is the mids and the highs. The Mark III going very much louder, very much more dynamic. The Mark III going very much louder. Of course, 40 watts versus 15 watts per speaker.
So if it's all about, you know, filling out a party or a big room with a lot of people, obviously the Minis can't hold it with the Mark III and a sub. Point out again, they're on axis. It's going to sound a bit more screechy than it would in the real world if you had your speaker off axis, and of course taking the benefit of the surface to give you a bit more body in the actual speaker itself. The difference between them in volume is big. If you are going to listen at high volumes, you're going to want the Mark III. If you don't listen at maximum volume and you like a more relaxing sound, actually, you know, if you are thinking of going to 2.1 or 2.2 system, I like the Minis. Mark III is a bit more accurate. There's more fizz on the little Mini, but I find it, you know, it's more laid back. I do like the sound, but it still sounds hi-fi in nature, which you can't say about a lot of speakers. You are paying for that, but it's the multitude of options, as I say, that you get with Minirig, to me, that makes it worth. And what I have to say, I can listen like this with the Mini, and it sounds nice. You know, and I'm still hearing bass. I'm hearing a clear sound, and it can be a bit analytical, and I can pick out the little nuances in my tracks that you can't do with, you know, a lot of other cheaper speakers. So I have to say, do like the Minis in a 2.1 system. When I'm just relaxing and I'm listening kind of close up, I'm picking up the Minis rather than the Mark 3s. And I must say, when I want, you know, a serious listen, it is the mini rigs I pick up. It is a bit of a hassle, you're connecting them all and having to pair them. But I haven't got any other options that I can do that with. Yes, I can get bigger speakers, more expensive speakers, where it's all in one and you don't have the little bit of fuss that's involved. But I do use all the options of taking one or two or all of them, you know, if I am traveling. So, as always, I hope you got something out of my video and I thank you for watching.
UK